Hey guys, just taking on a player rated just under 1000, and I have the white pieces. I've started with e4 and we have a Sicilian on the board, so I'm going to play the Alapin variation. It's pretty straightforward. You play c3 and preparing for d4, then if c takes d4 you've got c takes d4 and you keep your central pawns. So the whole idea of the Sicilian is to prevent d4 with the move c5. We'll see what my opponent does. So they are from the Netherlands, Lekkere Lasagna, rated 970. So we're going to be looking for, what does somebody around 1000, what do they need to be working on, what do they need to be looking at, what are the typical mistakes and errors that you quite often see. But it's not too short a format. Hopefully you'll have some time to think through the moves. An alternative as well is to play d4 straight away, allow that and then play c3, and that's called the Smith-Morra Gambit. Then you can recapture with a knight. Okay, so that's a quiet d6, so not making life easy for his dark squared bishop to get out into the board here. So I might expect that to fianchetto at some point, but I've got a bit of a dark squared structure going on myself. Okay, so now obviously we're in the opening. I'm going to focus on game plan. So knight out is an idea, rook out, so rook, bishop. Let's just develop the knight. Bishop will come out to there, I think. Might even line up the queen behind it and attack f7 that way. But my focus right now should be development. I can also think about the move d4 at some point. Now, so the knight's come out to f6. This pawn is undefended right now. So I'd like to defend with my knight, but I can't because of where these pawns are. So what do? Do I put my queen here? Or bishop there? Or do I push the pawn? That's another idea. Push pawn. If takes, I've got maybe knight takes. Or should I just drop my queen in here? Let's do that. It's kind of flexible. Gets my queen off the back rank. This knight's got issues, but I'm going to have to play d4 at some point too, which will give this knight a square to get onto. d4, we might swap off pawns here on d4. We shall see. Expecting lots of rooster action. It's a nice day. I think the door's open, so fans of Jag will I'm sure not be disappointed. I've spent most of the day building a house for my ducks and chickens in the garden, all out of recycled stuff. Out of there's an old greenhouse. I designed a greenhouse 3 years ago and built it, and that's recently come to the end of its life and collapsed. I'm not much of a builder, and so I've recycled some of the timber from that and an old bed and lots of interesting stuff. So we haven't spent a penny to build this. Okay, so there we go. He's preparing for that bishop fianchetto in the corner. It's pretty much what we expected. So I think this now seems fine, or I could push the d4 now as well. Let's do that. Let's strike out in the center a little bit and see what black wants to do. Does he want to swap off pawns here? If so, my queen actually becomes a bit lively. Yeah. So recapture with a pawn, or recapture with a knight. Recapture with a pawn. Capturing towards the center, generally a good idea. This pawn's defended. So I'm thinking bishop out to here or here. My knight can now get out into the game. My bishop can now get into the game. So bishop there, knight there. So I'm just thinking how I'm going to complete development. I want to do it fairly promptly now. See, the c3 move didn't really help my development that much, because the c pawn doesn't help either of my bishops get out into the board. It has to be one of these pawns, and the c pawn isn't one of them. Alright, so we have bishop fianchetto, so I think bishop out here looks fine. Pawn's defended. That's defended by the knight. I'll get ready to castle now. Yep. I'll castle as well. My opponent's playing a solid game so far. So no one has a c-pawn. The whole c-file is open. My opponent still has 1, 2, 3 pieces to develop, to complete development. We are now on move 8. So there has been some messing around. You can complete development on move 8. That's the quickest you can do it. Okay. Pawn is attacked once, defended once. I should bring out my dark squared bishop. That is kind of solid. E3. Could bring out my knight as well. Let's bring out the bishop just to here. I'm just going to play solid for now. Complete development, and then we move into the middle game. And the middle game is all about improving your pieces, preparing for an attack, and thinking about pawn breaks at the right time to shake up the board. So I'm thinking maybe knight here or knight here, which is best. Very, very standard position right now. I bet this position's been seen lots of times at all kinds of levels. I think knight here, because I don't want it to get in the way of my rook. You see, if I put my knight on d2, I might want to centralize my rooks here in preparation for pushing these pawns up the board. So I think knight to c3, rook a to d1, rook f to e1, and then we'll just send these guys on their way. Haha. Okay, so there's now 2 attackers on that pawn actually. So I think I'll capture. If I'd just retreated the bishop, we would have had pawn takes e4, and I've only got the queen defending it. So that was a good spot by my opponent. Alright, so things have changed slightly. He's now looking at my dark squared bishop. I'm quite happy to recapture with the f pawn. So, knight c3 now. He may capture that. That would suit me just fine. If he takes the knight, also I capture inwards towards the centre again. He may also just prefer to retreat. You see, now I've got 2 attackers on against this knight. Okay, so he's captured there. That's fine. Okay, so now I have the 2 central pawns. My opponent only has 1. He has 3 pieces now looking down at that, but the first defender is a pawn, so you know the exchange doesn't work because he'd be giving up a minor piece for a pawn. So now I definitely want to be centralizing these rooks, or maybe not this guy, maybe not the f rook, seeing as the f file is now semi-open, but I want to bring this guy across to the d file and think about advancing up there. It's a very solid structure, this. So what you want to do in situations like this, when your opponent's got that fianchetto king, okay, is usually try and damage this pawn structure by throwing pawns at it. So he doesn't like my bishop here, because the bishop's pinning the f pawn, kind of looking aggressive. At the same time, I do like my bishop, so I don't want him to capture that, and I want to leave his knight looking stupid on the side of the board. So how about this move? Pawn is defended twice. I think that's okay. And now this knight has just become weaker. Knights on the rim are dim, as everybody knows. So now I've completed development. We're on move 13. So now it's time to think about some aggression. How am I going to attack my opponent? I've got these 3 pawn islands now. I've got 3 pairs of pawns. Yeah, my opponent has 2 pawn islands, got a 2 and a 4. So I've got this central strength. So I think, you know, one thing in my advantage is that I can now push these guys up the board. Maybe attack thinking about like the e-file to attack. I still have my light squared bishop. I don't have a dark squared bishop. I also want to think about moving my knights up. Maybe here. Try and get a queen attack. Okay, good move, centralizing the rook. Makes a lot of sense. Okay, now if I push my pawn, I'm undefending this guy and it's attacked twice, so I don't know if I can do that yet. I think I might need to bring my rook across here and then think about pawn pushes. So it's a 1-15 game for me. I win 1 point if I win it and I lose 15 if I lose, so can't lose. Hey, it's only points in it anyway. It's only a game, guys. Okay, so it also makes this pawn maybe slightly more of a target, seeing as the rook's moved aside. So now the only defender of that pawn is His Majesty himself, the king. I might think about b4, get rid of this knight, send it back, send it packing, and then reposition my bishop here to look at that weak pawn. My knight is also in striking range of that pawn. So b4, then I can put my bishop and my queen onto this diagonal of doom. The knight can come flying in. See, black here is still not completed development. Queen's still on the back rank, bishop's still on the back rank. Knight's in a poor position on the side of the board. Okay, so I mean he's developed his bishop doing that. I could defend that way, which does defend but also attacks that or pins that pawn. The bishop's not particularly doing much where it is, but I kind of wanted to send it over here. Now how do I feel about bishop takes, pawn takes, or bishop takes, rook takes? And look, then my rook will be looking down at the f7 pawn, right? We've talked about this. So I'm quite happy with that. So I'm thinking now, I'm going to kick this knight back. Right, if it goes back to here, it will be attacking this pawn, so I might need to protect it with a3. And then think about this kind of setup, yeah? Bishop on that diagonal, queen on that diagonal. If black obliges me, I'll get my rook lined up with f7 as well. So what is black's intention? If captures, I'm definitely recapturing with the rook. But he's not going to do that now because he's got to retreat his knight. And I'm not sure why he's taking quite so long, because these two squares are covered. So he's only actually got one square. So the knight's going to go to there. I'll probably reinforce the pawn. If I pushed again to kick the knight can actually come back to a5. Alright, so I'm going to play that quickly. Now this knight's not looking great, you see, because I've got these dark squared pawns now. Right, so the knight can't actually make forward progress. Alright, that's interesting. That is interesting. Okay, so the pawn has 2 defenders. I have 2 attackers. No, it has 3 defenders actually. This is quite an interesting development. So I'm wondering about d5 now. But then pawn there is a fork. If I capture, this knight's actually pinned as well on the rook. So if I capture, knight takes. He's got some ideas, hasn't he? Or push, that could walk into that, which we don't want. I'll just drop my bishop back. Drop my bishop back breaks the pin on the knight. Then if takes, we just have some exchanges. I think looks safe. To say my opponent's playing surprisingly well for somebody rated below 1000. He's using his time well as well. So he's got 8 minutes left on the clock. That means he's thinking. That's a good sign. There we go. Cockerels. Barking dogs. Sometimes you just have to change your plans. You always have to be ready to respond appropriately to whatever your opponent's doing. I'd like to get my queen onto this diagonal at some point, reinstate that pin, and take advantage of this semi-open f-file as well. Okay, so we have captures. Right, this needs thinking through. Okay, so I've got pawn, knight, and rook looking at that. Okay, and it also has 3 defenders. Okay. So if pawn takes, let's think, or do I have a better kind of so one option is simply to move the knight. This pawn's actually pinned. This pawn can't really take the knight or that pawn because I've got a rook looking at black's queen. Okay, so it doesn't look as bad. It's not as bad as it looks, maybe what we're saying. Are we worried about pawn pushes? Not really. Totally defended on the d3 square. So with that in mind, so we've evaluated the risk. Yeah, my opponent's just grabbed a pawn. That's okay. Could I just like slide my queen over there? He's not going to push the pawn. He's not going to capture. So slide my queen here, looking down at f7. Then when this knight moves, there could be threats. Let's do it. Let's try it. So now even ideas of knight takes pawn. Knight takes pawn opens up the rook looking at f7, queen looking at f7. Knight takes pawn, let's say recaptures, I've got queen takes f7, check, king has to move into the corner. Then my attack kind of peters out slightly. Alright. So he's... okay, he's lined up the queen against my king here. That's kind of interesting. So I could play... now, knight to there blocks my queen. There's no point in that. Knight takes, queen in there. It doesn't really win me anything. Could put the question to this bishop, see if it wants to take. Say, or are you planning to capture there? Okay, so what he's done is at least he's got his queen out of the pin, right? Now if I take, he's got bishop takes, and then my king's in check. But the immediate threat is pawn takes knight. So maybe I need to think about doing something. So he's got 3 defenders, 1, 2, 3. Okay, I've got 1, 2, 3 attackers. So I'm not going to gain material by capturing. So how about takes? I actually think this bishop flying out wouldn't be a bad thing. So think about this, right? Let's say knight takes. Bishop takes with check. I move my king out of the way. And now I'm threatening queen takes here. Okay, and there's no bishop here. And then my knight can maybe come in. No, my knight's given itself up over here. Pawn takes. Let's try pawn takes. I think if knight takes or bishop takes, I've got knight captures, which opens up this danger here. Might have to move my king. This bishop's not doing much right now. This knight here is doing... Okay, so... Okay, the knight is looking at my queen. So I'm thinking I've got options of knight takes there. I think that's pretty much forced, you know. So I'm expecting bishop takes, yeah. Okay, bishop takes now, and king's going to move out the way. And now this is the threat that my opponent needs to be concerned with. Alright, so you've... Okay. So you've captured the knight. I now also have threats on here. That's good play. I should actually capture that bishop now, shouldn't I? Because otherwise this guy's falling. So I take the bishop. I'm threatening queen takes there, and I'm threatening queen takes f7. Very sharp and very well played game as well. Rook d7 is a possibility, and rook f7 also. That's interesting. Rook f7 has a threat of discovery then if the rook moves. So I could like capture here and win the queen. That could be very interesting. Not concerned about queen coming in here. Now you're going to have to save your dark squared bishop, but you've also got this problem as well, or possibly this problem. And that could be the more threatening of the two. See, queen takes just forces king to h8. And then what have I got? Queen back here? No, not while the bishop's on that diagonal. So, like, I'm out of checks, yeah? Okay. So I think I pretty much need to take the pawn, but I think rook, capturing with the rook. So let's think this through, yeah? Rook there, if it plays rook there, check, no dice, that's fine. Queen can't come in with check, so I'm going to capture with the rook and threaten the discovery here. So the big threat is like rook takes here, king's in check, good night, queen. Good play though, good play from a 970, really impressive. If I lose this game, then my opponent deserves 15 points from this performance for sure. So what are you going to do? Now, I think the right move now would be to move the king. And get rid of that danger. If that happens, I might think about doubling up. Yeah, good move. Okay. Right. My opponent has a dark squared bishop, so I'd like to get my rooks on like light squares. Material is equal. We've both got 4 pawns on the sides of the board. No, that's not a pawn. Okay. Material's equal. My rooks are slightly more active because I've got 1 off the back rank at least, whereas this guy is still stuck in the corner. It's very, very tight. I might think about bringing a rook across here, which forces his rooks really to stay on the back rank. Or, I mean, I'd love to do something like that and then attack with rooks. And maybe I need to just give my king an escape square, prevent back rank ideas, and then maybe put both rooks on the 7th rank. See, if I did that now, not there. They've got, you know, rook e1 is checkmate. So I need to think about defending the back rank. That's defended by my bishop currently and by my queen. How many open files are there? There's 1, 2, 3, 4. That's a lot of squares to defend. Yeah. So I'm thinking that just kind of sensible. 5 minutes. He's under 6 minutes now. He's taking a good amount of time to play. It's such an open and sharp position now. It's almost like anything could happen. Another idea is to triple up rook, queen, rook. That square is also guarded by the queen. That square is guarded by the bishop, so now if I do that, it's got check, this, check. I don't know. Under 5 minutes now. Okay. That's a blunder. Bishop takes queen. Unlucky. That is really unfortunate, my opponent, because they have played so well up to that point. Such a shame. I mean, that game was proper in the balance up to that point. It's going to be very hard for them to win now without a queen. I've just got too much material, too much firepower. But well played. I would have given them a take back from that, really. Yeah, it's all now. It's just too wide open now. I could sack my rook. I could do all kinds of things. Queen and bishop are defending each other. Okay, so how would I proceed from this point? I mean, swooping up pawns doesn't really, it's not going to make a massive difference to the game. Okay, I could attack the bishop. Everything else is kind of defended. But I think now, see, can I play now rook d to d7? Because he hasn't got a rook that can jump onto the back rank. Okay, now this square is obviously covered, so he's going to have ideas of this. But if I can get my rook in here, okay, I could have then, that would actually be mate. So I think that's an idea. If he had bothered to develop this rook at all, it would have been a very different story. Because I couldn't have done that. It would have been mate in 1, like that, or mate in 2. Queen blocks, takes, yeah. But right now he's looking at checkmate here, because the bishop's guarding the g8 square. He can't move the pawn. He can't block with a rook. All he can do is block with his bishop. I think is the only way really to prevent mate. If he interposes the rook, then just capture. If he moves his king, is that an idea? Then rook takes, check. King goes to here, and then, yeah, that might save his bacon for a few moves. I've also got a queen then threatening to come in here. It's not a pretty situation for my opponent. You fought bravely. You have regained your honor. Okay, 2.5 minutes. What you gonna do? But even moving the king here, I've got all kinds of ideas of discoveries, so let's go to here with check, swap off rooks. I think that's mate. Well, it's at least check, so yeah, checkmate. Great game, well done, mate. Very well played. Shame about the blunder. there you go. So very interesting game. Surprisingly good effort by my opponent until unfortunately blundering at the end. But you know, that's what players do. So what players do below 1,000 more, but certainly players above 1,000 do it as well. So you know, you need to be ready for your opponent to blunder. Always be open to the possibility that they'll blunder. Nice little checkmate at the end. Didn't even involve my queen, so she could have been off the board really at that point. But yeah, very interesting game. Very, very interesting game. So that's it. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to Chess Bootcamp if you haven't subscribed, and I'll see you soon. And I'm back off out to finish building my chicken and duck house. See you later.